The morning sun had just started to rise over the small southern town, painting the sky with soft orange light. The streets were quiet, except for a few cars heading to work. Among them was a black SUV moving steadily down the road. Inside, the car sat a woman in her early 40s, dressed neatly in a dark suit. Her expression was calm but focused, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. She had been driving for hours on her way to her first day at her new job, one that she had worked her whole life to earn. She wasn't just any driver passing through town. She was someone with years of experience in law enforcement, someone who believed deeply in fairness and respect. But at that moment, to anyone who didn't know her, she was just another face behind the wheel. A few blocks behind her, a police cruiser sat at a red light. Inside was Officer Brad, a man in his late 30s with a habit of watching people too closely. He had been with the department for nearly 10 years, but had developed a reputation for being overly aggressive on traffic stops. He believed he could read people just by looking at them, and unfortunately his judgments often came from the wrong place. When he saw the black SUV drive past, he narrowed his eyes. The tinted windows, the out-of-town plates, the unfamiliar face, it was enough for him to flip on his siren. Without a clear reason, he pulled out and began to follow. The woman in the SUV glanced in her mirror and noticed the flashing lights behind her. She frowned, slightly puzzled. She checked her speed. She wasn't speeding. She had used her signal at every turn. Still, she slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road, just as she had taught many others to do in her years of service. Officer Brad stepped out of his car, his hand resting near his holster. He walked toward her vehicle with quick, firm steps. The woman rolled down her window and waited quietly, keeping her hands visible on the steering wheel. "License and registration," he said sharply before even greeting her. She nodded calmly and reached for her purse. "Of course, officer. May I ask what this stop is about?" she asked politely. "Just do what I said," Brad replied, his tone clipped. He glanced around her car, his suspicion growing. "Where are you headed this early?" "I'm on my way to work," she replied. "I just arrived in town last night." "Work? What kind of work?" he asked, as if she were trying to hide something. "Law enforcement," she said quietly, not wanting to make the situation worse, but he didn't seem to believe her. He took her license, glanced at it briefly, then frowned. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. "Is there a reason for that, officer?" she asked, keeping her tone even. She could sense the tension rising, the kind she had seen too many times in her career. "Don't question me, just step out," he barked, his hand now resting firmly on his weapon. A cold stillness filled the air. The woman sighed softly and unbuckled her seatbelt. She knew she couldn't argue. Not here, not with someone like him. As she opened the door slowly, Brad suddenly raised his gun. "Hands where I can see them!" he shouted. The woman froze. Her heart thumped hard against her chest, but she didn't move. Her calm voice carried over the tension. "Officer, there is no need for that. I am cooperating." But Brad didn't lower his weapon. He had already made up his mind that she was a threat. His fear mixed with arrogance, clouding his judgment. People nearby began to stop and watch. A man walking his dog pulled out his phone and started recording. "Why are you pointing a gun at her?" the man shouted from across the street. Brad ignored him. "Step away from the car," he yelled again. The woman took a deep breath. "Officer, please, think carefully about what you're doing," she said softly. "You don't want to make a mistake today." But he wasn't listening. He motioned for her to walk toward the hood of her car. She did as he said, her movements slow and deliberate. The morning air felt heavy with tension. The only sound was the steady hum of his cruiser's siren and the clicking of phone cameras capturing every moment. When she reached the front of the car, Brad ordered her to put her hands on the hood. He cuffed her wrists tightly, ignoring her small wince of pain. "You're making a mistake," she said again, this time with a quiet firmness. "We'll see about that," he muttered. "What's your name again?" she told him calmly. But when he radioed it in, he didn't notice the small pause that followed from dispatch. The woman did, though. She knew someone on the other end was trying to piece things together. By now, a few more bystanders had gathered. A woman holding a coffee cup was shaking her head in disbelief. "This is crazy," she said under her breath. "She didn't do anything." The woman in handcuffs remained still. She didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She had learned long ago that calmness could sometimes be the strongest response. Inside, though, she couldn't help but feel a deep disappointment. She had spent decades trying to make policing better, trying to build trust between officers and the communities they served. And now, on her very first day as the new chief, this was her welcome. Brad started checking her car, muttering to himself. He looked through the back window even though there was nothing suspicious inside, just a suitcase and a briefcase neatly placed on the seat. "Officer," she said quietly, "please call your supervisor." "I don't take orders from you," he snapped. "You will want to make that call," she said, her voice steady. There was no anger in her tone, only certainty. "It will save you a lot of trouble." Her calmness unsettled him. He didn't know why she seemed so confident. Maybe she was bluffing, he thought. Maybe she was hiding something. His pride wouldn't let him back down. He paced around the car once more, then looked at her with narrowed eyes. "You think you can talk your way out of this?" he said. "I know your type." The words stung, not because they were new, but because they were familiar. She had heard that tone before, the tone that assumed guilt before facts. She closed her eyes briefly, taking a slow breath. She didn't want to lose her temper, not now. A few minutes later, another police car arrived. It was Officer Jenkins, one of Brad's co-workers. He stepped out looking confused at the sight before him. "What's going on here?" Jenkins asked, glancing between Brad and the woman. "Suspicious vehicle," Brad replied quickly. "Driver wasn't cooperating." Jenkins frowned. "She looks pretty calm to me," he said. Then he turned to the woman. "Ma'am, can I ask your name?" She repeated it politely. Jenkins paused, recognition flickering across his face. He had seen that name in an email sent to all officers just yesterday, the announcement of the new police chief's arrival. Before he could speak, Brad interrupted. "Don't waste time, Jenkins. Just help me run her info." Jenkins hesitated. Something didn't feel right. He walked back to his car and radioed dispatch himself. "Can you confirm the name of the new police chief for me?" he asked quietly. A few seconds of silence followed, then a reply. "Yes, Chief Angela Reynolds. She was scheduled to arrive this morning." Jenkins froze. He looked up, his eyes widening. He turned toward Brad, who was still talking loudly to the crowd, unaware of what he had just done. "Brad," Jenkins called out, "you might want to stop right now." "What are you talking about?" Brad said, annoyed. Jenkins took a deep breath. "That's Chief Reynolds." The words hung in the air. Brad's face went pale. He slowly turned toward the woman who was still standing there, her calm eyes watching him. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The look on his face said everything. The bystanders started whispering, realizing what had just happened. The woman with the coffee cup gasped softly. The man recording lowered his phone, shaking his head. Brad's hands trembled slightly as he fumbled for his keys to unlock the cuffs. But the damage was already done. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything he had ever experienced. As the cuffs came off, the woman straightened her jacket and looked at him. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "Next time, officer, remember that respect should come before judgment." Then she walked back to her car, her dignity untouched. Brad stood there, his gun holstered, realizing he had just made the biggest mistake of his career, and it was only going to get worse from here. The crowd that had gathered on the street didn't move for a while. Everyone stood there trying to process what had just happened. The woman, Chief Reynolds, sat quietly in her car, her hands resting on the steering wheel once again. She didn't drive away immediately. She took a moment to breathe, to steady her thoughts. Her heart was still beating fast, but her face showed no anger, only disappointment. Officer Jenkins stayed nearby, watching her through the window. He looked nervous, unsure whether to approach her or stay back. Brad, on the other hand, was frozen where he stood. The reality of what he'd done was sinking in fast. His mouth felt dry and his mind was racing. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, Chief Reynolds rolled down her window. Her voice was calm when she spoke. "Officer Jenkins," she said. "Please call the captain. Tell him I'll be at headquarters soon." Jenkins nodded quickly and hurried to his car. Brad stood there awkwardly, his eyes fixed on the ground. Chief Reynolds looked at him once more, but she didn't say another word. Then she drove off slowly, the crowd parting to let her through. Some people clapped softly as she passed. Others just shook their heads in disbelief. The man with the phone lowered his camera. "Man, that's gonna go viral," he muttered. Back at the precinct, things were quiet. The morning briefings hadn't started yet, and the officers were still settling in. When Chief Reynolds walked in, the front desk officer stood up in surprise. He had seen her photo in the department email, but wasn't expecting her so soon, or under those circumstances. "Good morning, Chief," he said nervously. "The captain's in his office." "Thank you," she replied with a small nod. Her tone was polite but distant. As she walked down the hallway, the sound of her heels echoed softly against the tiled floor. A few officers glanced up from their desks, curious. She was composed, every step steady, though inside she was replaying the entire incident in her head. She had faced many things in her career: dangerous arrests, tough cases, and political battles. But what had just happened was something different. It wasn't about fear or risk. It was about something deeper. It was about the culture she had promised herself to change. When she reached the captain's office, he was already waiting for her. He had heard from Jenkins a few minutes earlier and was still trying to process the situation. "Chief Reynolds," he began as she entered. I just heard what happened. Are you all right?" She gave a small nod. "I'm fine, Captain. Shaken, maybe, but fine." He hesitated before asking, "And Officer Brad?" "He's probably still trying to figure out what hit him," she said quietly. "I didn't want to escalate it, but something like this can't be ignored." The captain nodded slowly. He could tell by her tone that she wasn't angry. She was disappointed. "That was worse. I agree. We'll handle this carefully." "I'm sure you will," she said, "but I'll be addressing it myself too. The department needs to hear it from me." The captain sighed. "There are cameras, Chief. People recorded the whole thing. It's already online. By now, half the town's seen it." "I expected that," she said, her voice calm. "And maybe it's not such a bad thing. Sometimes people need to see the truth before they believe there's a problem." Meanwhile, in the parking lot outside, Brad sat alone in his patrol car. His hands were still trembling slightly. He couldn't stop thinking about how quickly things had turned upside down. One minute he thought he was doing his job. The next, he was being stared down by the new chief of police. His stomach twisted every time he remembered the look in her eyes, steady, disappointed, and controlled. Jenkins walked over and knocked on his window. "You all right, man?" he asked quietly. Brad didn't answer right away. "She didn't even yell at me," he said finally. "Didn't even raise her voice," Jenkins sighed. "Yeah, that's how you know you messed up bad." Brad rubbed his face. "You think I'm done?" "I don't know," Jenkins replied honestly. "But if I were you, I'd start thinking about why this happened. And not just what it means for your job." Brad didn't respond. He stared out at the horizon, lost in thought. Inside the building, Chief Reynolds sat in her new office. It was large but plain, still filled with boxes from the previous chief. She looked around, noticing a framed poster on the wall that read, "Integrity, Service, Respect." The irony wasn't lost on her. She opened her laptop and began typing a statement. She knew reporters would call soon and she wanted to be ready. But more than that, she wanted her own officers to understand what this meant. This wasn't just about one bad decision. It was about a system of habits, attitudes, and unchecked biases that had quietly shaped the department for years. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from the mayor's office. "Heard about the incident. Call me when you can?" She put the phone down and leaned back in her chair. Her mind went back to the moment on the road, the way Brad had looked at her the instant his hand went to his gun. It wasn't just fear she had seen in his eyes. It was assumption. He had already decided who she was before she even spoke. A soft knock came at the door. It was Jenkins again, standing there with his cap in his hands. "Chief, I just wanted to apologize on behalf of the department," he said quietly. "What happened out there, it shouldn't have happened." She looked up at him, her expression gentle. "I know you didn't do anything wrong, officer, but I appreciate you saying that." He hesitated. "Brad's..." Not taking it well, she nodded. He shouldn't be. But maybe this will be the moment he starts to see what others go through. Maybe it'll change something. Jenkins gave a small nod. I hope so. After he left, she sat for a long while in silence. She knew what was coming next, the press, the internal review, the statements. But more than that, she knew this incident would define her leadership from the very start. She couldn't just move past it. She had to turn it into something meaningful. By noon, news vans were parked outside the precinct. Reporters were asking questions. Did an officer really pull a gun on the new chief? Was it racially motivated? What will the department do about it? Inside, the captain tried to manage the growing chaos. Chief Reynolds, however, stayed calm. She gathered her notes and walked toward the conference room. A few officers followed behind her, curious and nervous. When she entered, the chatter died down. Every camera turned toward her. She took her seat, folded her hands, and looked straight at the reporters. Yes, she began clearly. An officer did stop me this morning. Yes, a gun was drawn. And yes, it was unnecessary. The room went silent. She continued, her voice steady. But I want to make something very clear. This isn't about anger, it's about reflection. What happened to me is what too many people in this country experience every day. The difference is that I have the authority to do something about it. One reporter asked, "Do you plan to fire the officer?" Chief Reynolds paused for a moment. "I plan to hold him accountable," she said. "But I also plan to use this as a lesson. Accountability is not just punishment. It's change." The next question came quickly. "Do you think this incident will hurt the department's image?" She gave a faint smile. "Truth doesn't hurt an image. Hiding it does. We can't fix what we don't face." Her words spread quickly across social media. People who watched the video were struck by her calmness. She wasn't bitter or defensive. She was dignified, determined. Many called her a role model. Others said she represented what real leadership should look like. Meanwhile, Brad stayed home that evening, staring blankly at his TV. The video of the stop was everywhere. He saw his own face on the screen, angry, defensive, unthinking. It made his stomach turn. He turned the TV off, but the sound of her calm voice lingered in his head. Respect should come before judgment. He realized then that she hadn't humiliated him in public or tried to ruin him. She had simply shown him what his own choices looked like under the light of truth. At the same time, Chief Reynolds sat in her quiet office, the noise of the day fading. She looked out the window at the city she now led. It wouldn't be easy, she knew that. Change never was. But she also knew that every step forward began with a moment of truth. And today that moment had come. Loud, painful, but necessary. Tomorrow the real work would begin. The morning after the press conference, the police station felt different. The air was heavy, not with anger, but with silence. People spoke in low voices, careful not to say too much. Everyone had watched the news. Everyone had seen the video. And now everyone knew what kind of leader they were dealing with. Chief Reynolds arrived early just after sunrise. She walked through the halls calmly, greeting the few officers already there. Some avoided eye contact, unsure of how to approach her after everything that had happened. Others nodded politely, their respect for her growing quietly. When she reached her office, a stack of reports was waiting on her desk. Alongside them sat a small note from the captain. Meeting with Officer Brad, 9 a.m. She sighed softly and sat down, folding her hands for a moment. She wasn't looking forward to that meeting. Not because she was angry, but because she knew how important it would be. How she handled this would set the tone for the whole department. Across town, Brad sat in his kitchen, staring into a cold cup of coffee. He hadn't slept much. His mind kept replaying the moment she looked at him, calm, steady, unshaken. He had expected her to explode, to yell, to humiliate him, but she didn't. Instead, she made him see himself, and that was somehow worse. He looked at his reflection in the window and didn't like what he saw. The uniform hanging nearby suddenly felt heavy, like it didn't belong to him anymore. But he couldn't avoid what was coming. He had to face her. At exactly 9, he walked into the precinct. Every pair of eyes seemed to follow him. Some whispered quietly, others simply shook their heads. He knew what they were thinking. How could he make such a mistake and in front of everyone? He kept his gaze straight ahead, walking toward the chief's office. When he entered, Chief Reynolds was standing by the window, looking out at the city. She turned slowly, her expression calm. "Good morning, officer," she said simply. "Good morning, Chief," he replied, his voice low. She motioned for him to sit. He did, folding his hands in his lap. The room felt still. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Then she began. "I want to start by saying I'm not here to destroy your career," she said quietly. "But I do want to talk about what happened, honestly." Brad nodded. "Yes, ma'am. You pulled your gun on someone who wasn't a threat," she said. "You didn't ask questions. You didn't pause to think. You reacted. Why?" He hesitated. I thought something was off," he said, though his voice shook. "The car looked suspicious and what?" She interrupted softly. "Was it the car or was it the person in the car?" He swallowed hard. The question hit him deeper than he expected. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "That's the problem," she said. "You didn't know, but you acted like you did. You decided who I was before I even spoke. You weren't just wrong about me. You were wrong about what your badge stands for." Her tone wasn't harsh, but it carried weight. Brad looked down, ashamed. "I messed up," he said quietly. "I know that. I believe you do," she said. "But I also believe mistakes can teach us if we're willing to learn from them." She sat down across from him. "I didn't come here to fire you, not yet. I came here to make sure you understand what you almost did. Not just to me, but to yourself, to this department, and to the trust we're supposed to build." He nodded slowly. "I understand, Chief, I really do." "Do you?" she asked. "Because understanding isn't the same as changing." He met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw something different in his eyes. Guilt, yes, but also something close to realization. "I want to change," he said finally. "I don't want to be that kind of officer anymore." She nodded. "Good, because that's what we're going to work on. But it's not going to be easy. You'll have to face yourself every day. You'll have to earn back respect, not just from others, but from yourself." He nodded again. "I'll do whatever it takes." Chief Reynolds leaned back in her chair. "I'm going to assign you to community service detail for the next few months," she said. "You'll work directly with residents, no patrol, no weapon. You'll listen more than you speak. You'll learn what it means to serve, not control." Brad looked surprised but didn't protest. "Yes, Chief." She stood, signaling the meeting was over. "That's all for now. You can go." As he rose to leave, she added softly, "Brad, remember this. Every person you meet out there has a story you don't know. Don't decide who they are before you hear it." He nodded again, his voice quiet. "Yes, ma'am." When he left, she exhaled slowly. That conversation had taken more energy than she expected. She wanted to believe people could change. She had seen it before, but it always started with honesty and a little humility. Later that day, she met with the captain and a few senior officers. They discussed the public reaction, the upcoming internal review, and the department's next steps. Some officers were nervous about the attention. Others were defensive, worried the entire force would be judged by one mistake. Chief Reynolds listened to them all, then spoke firmly. "We can't control what people think," she said. "But we can control what we do next. If we handle this with honesty, we'll earn more trust, not less." The captain nodded slowly. "People already respect the way you handled it, Chief. You were calm, fair. That video's been shared everywhere. You've made this department look human again." She smiled faintly. "That's the goal. We're supposed to serve people, not scare them." Meanwhile, outside the precinct, a small group of community leaders had gathered. They wanted to meet her, to thank her for how she handled the situation. She agreed to see them. They met in the front lobby, where she greeted them warmly. An older woman stepped forward and said, "Chief, what you did out there, that took strength. You could have reacted with anger, but you didn't. You showed grace." Chief Reynolds smiled. "Thank you. But what matters now is what happens next. I want to work with all of you to rebuild trust. That's not going to happen through press conferences. It's going to happen through action." The group agreed. They talked about hosting open community meetings, inviting residents to speak directly with officers. They discussed training programs focused on empathy and cultural awareness. Chief Reynolds took notes, listening closely to every suggestion. When the meeting ended, the older woman touched her arm gently. "You've got a hard road ahead," she said, "but you're the right person to walk it." That evening, the precinct felt calmer. Officers were quieter, more thoughtful. Some watched Chief Reynolds with new respect. They had seen leaders come and go, but she was different. She didn't lead with fear. She led with dignity. Brad stayed late helping file reports. It wasn't part of his assignment, but he wanted to stay busy. As he worked, he glanced occasionally at the chief's office. The door was open, light spilling out into the hallway. He could see her still there, writing something in a notebook. He thought about walking in, about saying thank you, but decided against it. Instead, he went back to his work quietly. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of what it truly meant to wear the badge. Chief Reynolds finally closed her notebook and stood by the window again, watching the lights outside flicker. It had been a long 2 days, and she knew more challenges were coming. But she also knew she had made the right choices. Sometimes leadership wasn't about power or rank. It was about patience, about being the calm in the storm. She turned off the light and walked out of her office. As she passed through the halls, she saw a few young officers still working. She smiled at them, and they smiled back. There was hope there, a quiet kind of hope that change was possible. Outside, the night air was cool. She took a deep breath, looking up at the stars. Somewhere inside her, she felt a small sense of peace. The road ahead would be hard, but she was ready for it. Because in the end, change didn't start with policies or speeches. It started with people. One heart, one choice, one act of courage at a time. The days after the incident became a whirlwind for Chief Reynolds. Every time she turned on the news or scrolled through social media, she saw people discussing the event. Some criticized the officer, some praised her, but one thing was clear. Everyone was talking about respect, accountability, and fairness. She knew this was an opportunity, not just for her, but for the entire department. Inside the precinct, she had begun to implement changes immediately. She called a staff meeting for all officers, both seasoned and new recruits. The room was packed, the air buzzing with curiosity and tension. She walked to the front, her hands folded in front of her, and looked around the room. "I want to speak to you all about something that happened recently," she began calmly. "You've seen the video, you know the story. What matters now is what we do next. We have a choice. We can ignore the mistakes or we can learn from them. I intend for us to choose the latter." She went on to explain that the department would start a series of workshops on communication, bias awareness, and community engagement. Every officer, including Brad, would participate. This was not punishment, she emphasized, but an investment in growth. Brad sat in the back of the room, tense but listening. The first few words she spoke had pierced him like a cold wind. He had thought he understood respect, but her words made him realize how much he had missed. The training, the workshops, the discussions, they would force him to confront the habits and assumptions that had almost ruined everything. After the meeting, she took a moment to speak with Officer Jenkins, who had quietly supported her throughout the ordeal. "We need to make sure this isn't just talk," she said. "I want real change, not just compliance. We owe it to the people out there and to ourselves." Jenkins nodded. "I'll help. I'll make sure it happens." Chief Reynolds knew that changing a department wasn't going to be easy. Some officers might resist. Others might dismiss her efforts as unnecessary. But she also knew that true leadership was about persistence, consistency, and showing people through example rather than fear. Meanwhile, Brad began his new assignment in the community. For the first time, he was walking through neighborhoods without a weapon, without authority over anyone but himself. He listened as residents shared their experiences with policing, their fears and their frustrations. Every story cut deeper than the last. He saw the pain that could be caused by assumptions, by hasty judgments, by lack of communication. One afternoon, a young man approached him nervously. He had been stopped by officers many times before, often treated roughly. Brad knelt slightly to meet him at eye level. "I want to hear your story," he said. The man told him about the fear he felt whenever he saw a police uniform. Brad listened, really listened, without interrupting, without defending. He realized he had been blind to this before. Each story was a reminder of why his behavior mattered and how easily things could go wrong. Back at the precinct, Chief Reynolds spent hours reviewing policies and procedures. She wanted to ensure accountability at every level. She met with supervisors, discussing ways to reinforce training and emphasize de-escalation techniques. She wasn't seeking perfection. She was seeking progress. Every day she walked through the halls, greeting officers and checking in with their work. She noticed Brad working diligently, showing signs of change in his attitude. He was quieter, more reflective, less quick to judge. She observed the effort and knew that change, even if small at first, was beginning to take root. The community began to notice as well. Local residents wrote letters, called in with compliments, and shared stories about the positive changes they were seeing. Some officers were skeptical, thinking it was temporary, but Chief Reynolds remained patient. She knew real change took time, consistency, and repeated action. One evening, after a long day, she walked through a park where some children were playing. She watched them laugh, run, and be carefree. She thought about the responsibility her department carried, the trust it needed to rebuild. She knew that every choice she made, every officer she guided, would ripple out into the lives of people she might never meet. The experience with Brad also lingered in her mind. It was a stark reminder that even trained officers could act on fear, bias, and assumptions. She reflected on how she had handled it, the calm voice, the steady presence, the refusal to escalate the situation. Those small choices had made a huge difference. She hoped that showing the right way to lead would inspire others to do the same. Weeks passed, and the workshops began to show results. Officers who were initially skeptical started participating actively. They asked questions, shared their experiences, and engaged in honest dialogue. Brad in particular began to speak openly about his past assumptions, admitting mistakes he hadn't recognized before. His colleagues noticed the change in him, and some began to reflect on their own actions. Chief Reynolds kept a careful balance between enforcing accountability and encouraging growth. She didn't shy away from difficult conversations, but she also made sure that every officer felt supported if they were willing to learn. Her approach fostered a culture of transparency, honesty, and responsibility. Community engagement increased. Neighborhood meetings were held regularly, allowing residents to voice their concerns directly to the department. The discussions were honest, sometimes difficult, but always constructive. Chief Reynolds attended each session, listening as much as she spoke, showing the community that their experiences mattered and that the police force was committed to change. Through it all, Chief Reynolds maintained her calm and steady presence. She knew that leadership wasn't about being liked. It was about being respected and trusted. She also knew that patience, empathy, and consistent action were far more powerful than authority or fear. Brad, now more aware of his own biases, began mentoring newer officers. He shared his experiences openly, hoping to prevent similar mistakes. While it was humbling, he understood that growth required humility. The journey was ongoing, but he was determined to improve. By the end of the month, the precinct felt different. There was a sense of purpose and renewed commitment. Chief Reynolds had managed to turn a dangerous mistake into an opportunity for growth, both for individual officers and for the department as a whole. The community noticed, the officers adapted, and the department slowly regained its sense of integrity and trust. As she walked through the halls one evening, Chief Reynolds paused to look at the framed values on the wall: integrity, service, respect. She smiled quietly to herself. They weren't just words anymore. They were becoming reality, one choice at a time. She knew there were still challenges ahead. Mistakes would happen, biases would surface, and resistance would continue. But she also knew that with patience, empathy, and consistent leadership, her department could become a model of accountability and trust. And for Chief Reynolds, that was the most important work she could do. Months had passed since the incident on the street, yet Chief Reynolds still thought about it from time to time. It was a moment that had started as a mistake and had become a turning point. The community, the department, and even Officer Brad had all grown from that one event, but the work was never truly over. She knew leadership was not a title or a badge. It was action, consistency, and the willingness to confront hard truths. The precinct had settled into a rhythm of accountability and communication. Officers were no longer hesitant to speak up when they saw problems. Trainings had become regular, honest conversations were encouraged, and community engagement was now a priority. Chief Reynolds made sure to participate in these efforts personally, attending neighborhood meetings, workshops, and small gatherings where residents could speak freely about their experiences. One morning, she walked through the park with a small group of young officers. The sun was warm, the streets quiet, and the air carried a gentle sense of calm. Children ran around laughing and playing, while residents walked their dogs and chatted with neighbors. She looked at the officers, observing how they interacted with the community now, listening, smiling, engaging with respect. Officer Brad was with them, carrying a notepad and taking notes as they met residents. He stopped to talk to a young man who had once been hesitant to speak to the police. The conversation was quiet, respectful, and meaningful. Chief Reynolds watched from a distance, satisfied to see the progress he had made. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying, and that effort mattered. Later that afternoon, Chief Reynolds returned to her office to review reports and emails. One email caught her attention, a letter from a family in a nearby neighborhood. They wrote about how the presence of officers in their community, engaging respectfully and openly, had begun to change their perception of the police. Children felt safer, parents felt heard, and even older residents felt a renewed sense of trust. She smiled quietly, knowing that small actions could ripple out into lives in ways no one might ever fully see. Just then, the phone rang. It was Officer Jenkins. "Chief, there's something you should see," he said. She followed him outside where a small crowd had gathered in front of the precinct. A local reporter was interviewing a group of residents about the changes in community policing. When they spotted Chief Reynolds, they quickly invited her to speak. She stepped forward, her posture calm and composed. "Thank you for having me," she began, her voice steady. "I know there have been mistakes in the past. There have been times when trust was broken and assumptions were made. But today I want to show you that change is possible. It starts with listening, understanding, and treating everyone with respect." The residents nodded, some clapping softly. One man stepped forward, shaking her hand. "Thank you, Chief. You've shown us that police can be different, that they can care." She felt a warmth in her chest. This was the moment she had hoped for, the moment when leadership met real impact. "It's not just about me," she said. "It's about all of us working together. Every officer, every resident, every choice we make. That's how trust is built. That's how communities are made safer, stronger, and more united." After the crowd dispersed, she walked back to the precinct. Brad was waiting, his expression serious yet reflective. "Chief," he said quietly, "I just wanted to thank you for showing me the right way, for giving me the chance to change." She nodded. "You did the work, Brad. You made the choice to listen and learn. That's what matters." He looked down, humble, but there was a spark of understanding in his eyes. "I still have a lot to learn," he admitted. "We all do," she replied. "The important thing is that we keep trying." That evening, Chief Reynolds sat in her office reviewing the latest community feedback. Each message, each phone call, and each note reminded her why she had chosen this path. She thought about the officer who had pulled his gun that morning, the fear and assumptions that had driven him, and the opportunity that had come from his mistake. Mistakes could destroy trust, but they could also inspire change if handled with care, dignity, and courage. Her thoughts turned to the broader impact. She had seen officers grow, residents feel safer, and a department begin to heal. It wasn't perfect and there were still challenges ahead, but the foundation had been laid. Leadership, she knew, was about persistence, empathy, and patience. It was about holding people accountable while also guiding them toward improvement. She glanced at a photo on her desk, a picture of children from a community event smiling and waving at officers. She felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. This was why she had endured the embarrassment, the tension, and the scrutiny. This was why she had chosen to lead with patience and grace rather than anger or fear. Days later, the captain called her office. "Chief Reynolds, the mayor wants to meet with you. He's impressed with the changes and the positive response from the community," he said. She nodded. "I'll make time. But this isn't about recognition," she said. "It's about continuing the work." The meeting with the mayor was productive. They discussed ways to expand community programs, improve training for officers, and strengthen accountability measures. Chief Reynolds spoke clearly and thoughtfully, emphasizing the importance of transparency, empathy, and ongoing dialogue. The mayor listened, impressed by her clarity and dedication. Afterward, she returned to the precinct where she found Brad reviewing notes from a community session. He looked up and nodded at her. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, the importance of listening before acting. I want to keep doing better," she smiled faintly. "And you will, Brad. It's about the choices you make every day. Keep making the right ones and you'll see the results." The precinct settled into a routine where officers were engaged, accountable, and connected to the community. Chief Reynolds continued to lead with calm authority, guiding her team through challenges and celebrating small victories. She knew the path forward would not always be smooth, but she was ready. Every step, every decision, and every act of leadership mattered. One quiet evening, she walked through the precinct, passing officers who were busy at their desks. She paused for a moment, reflecting on the journey, the incident on the street, the lessons learned, the growth, and the community's response. She felt a deep sense of purpose. Leadership wasn't about avoiding mistakes. It was about handling them with dignity, using them to inspire growth, and showing others the way forward. Chief Reynolds knew the work was never finished, but she also knew that with persistence, empathy, and unwavering dedication, change was possible. And in that knowledge, she found hope, not just for herself, but for her department, the community, and the future of policing in her town.